let's go into some nutrition now. You advocate a dog food. Is it called Yucabanca?
So yeah, that's what I feed. Eukanuba.
Eukanuba, sorry. Yeah.
And so it's one of the foods that I fed in the past as well. I'm a big believer in the major manufacturers. And so, I kind of the two I trumpet would be Eukanuba and Purina Pro Plan. I know researchers on both of those teams. I think that they are producing products that they really have the longevity of our dogs in mind, in that they, want to help these dogs live as long of healthy as life as possible. And so I'm a big believer in those two companies.
Okay. So, when you're reading a dog food bag, could you kind of explain to people what are the main things you're looking for?
So I will tell you, the dog food industry is unintentionally one of the most deceptive industries on the planet, I think. And so it's very difficult to read a bag and tell the quality of that food. A lot has to be based on reputation and things like that. And so, we were talking before we jumped on about, like chicken byproduct and stuff, right? So chicken byproduct meal, from one company can be a highly refined, very bioavailable, really good protein source. And so if they're taking that organ meat and they're processing it in a way that it's high protein, good bioavailability, chicken byproduct meal can be a great thing. From another company, it can be what you think of byproducts, right? It can be low quality, who knows what's ground up in there. The problem is on the bag, it's going to say chicken byproduct meal. And I don't know if it's this good, the crappy stuff, or if it's the good stuff. And so it's very difficult to just look at a bag and know the quality of ingredients that you're getting. And that's where I think the thing that comes into hand is the reputation of the company and the history of the company. And so a lot of the dog food industry is you're buying a marketing story, not necessarily science. And I think that that's the part that people, miss, is that so much of that dog food industry is based on marketing. So they're telling you what you think you want to hear versus what we know and what the science shows. And so it's one that's why I usually advocate to people. Am I buying science or am I buying a marketing story? Is that's the place I start with when I'm evaluating a food. You'll see in a lot of these boutique-y, high-end foods, there used to be a formula, and I think it's still probably on the market. I won't name brands, but it was called the red meat formula. But if you looked at the ingredient list, it had like lentils and green lentils and crushed lentils and lentil flour and like ingredient splitting, right? So it's one where if we actually probably added the ingredients up that we labeled different ways, it was probably a lentil formula as opposed to a red meat formula. And that's, that's how corn got, tagged as an evil ingredient, is that back in the day, the old feed mills would use, corn and crushed corn and cracked corn. And it wasn't that corn was evil. It was just that it was a freaking corn formula that sucked for the dog, but people thought it was the corn that was causing the problem. And so, what I've noticed, with these higher end formulas is that they're going to use novel ingredients, but they're going to do that ingredient splitting, which is what the cheap, elevator formulas used to do, back in the day. And so it's understanding what you're actually buying. And so if I was looking at an ingredient label, those would be the things I'd look for, are beets on here 3 times, but in different forms, or are we using a carbohydrate, but we're using it 6 or 7 times. It's one of those sort of things that, like, am I being deceived and marketed to, or am I actually buying a good formula? Is where I would start with that process. And then knowing who's making the formula. I think too, the problem is that, there's some of these small companies that they don't manufacture their own formula. And so, there's some of these boutique formulas that will cast stone at other manufacturers and how they're made by that manufacturer, and so it's understanding, the source of your food as well. That company that's telling you this heartwarming story, they might be made by a company that, has been involved in every recall that we've had in the pet food industry. They just leave that part of their story out. And so I've been in and out of the consulting world for, the last 20 years. And anytime I'm out of it for even more than 12 months, I have to call people and be like, who's making this? I'll hear of a new formula or something becomes popular, and I have to call and be like, okay, who's making this formula? What's the story on it? Because, even as somebody that's worked in the industry and is a veterinarian, like looking at bags or websites, it's impossible to tell the quality of that product.
Yeah. And there's been a lot of recalls lately, ain't it? Boy. Yep. So working dogs, what kind of food do you recommend for working dogs as far as like carbs?
Yeah, so it really depends on workload, right? And so one of the things that I battle in the hunting dog world is that everybody wants to feed a performance formula because they have a performance dog, right? And so a lot of these formulas I think are misnamed. Like we never should have called these performance formulas. Like that whole 30-20 blend should have been called an endurance formula. It's meant for dogs that are working hard multiple days in a row. The food doesn't create the performance dog. You have a dog that does a certain activity and it's giving the nutrition for that activity, right? And so it's one that, you know, if I have a dog that you know is working, you know, 30-40 minutes a day and that's its workload, most adult maintenance foods are going to be fine, right? And so it's one that I think it's knowing your dog's workload. And so kind of the generic cutoff that I use is if a dog works for 4 days out of the week hard for several hours a day, that's a dog that's going to need to be on you know, a performance diet, like in that 30-20 range. Most other dogs are going to be fine on a good maintenance diet. I think the problem that occurs is that when people go to the other end of the spectrum, where they go into that novel kind of pet food market, or they get a novel ingredient, is that sometimes they're cheating those dogs and they'll be low in fat and protein. And so making sure that we, you know, don't go too low on that stuff because we're feeding, you know, New Zealand crocodiles mixed with, you know, Norwegian birds, you know, where it's an expensive ingredient. So they're not putting much in it, but they want to label it that. And that goes back to where, am I buying science or am I buying marketing? And so, you know, some of your lamb-based formulas, some of your fish-based formulas sometimes will be a little bit too low in protein and fat. So just keep an eye that you're getting what you're paying for.
Right. So in my dogs, since I breed Central Asian Shepherds and Corsos, we always taught to grow the dog slow. So will a maintenance food do that, or is the maintenance considered a large breed puppy food? Maybe
it's not. And so back in the day when we had two options, one puppy formula and one maintenance food, you would the maintenance food, because it was lower in calories than like your traditional puppy food, was a better option for those large breed dogs. I will say that that fallacy continues to live. And I will say that that's probably one of the most detrimental fallacies that we still have that lives in the breeder world, in the performance dog world, is that maintenance is a large breed puppy food. And it's not. And so if, you know, I kind of touched on it earlier, to me, the most important thing that you can do with a large breed puppy or with an athletic dog, so even if it's a 5-pound dog is going to be an athlete, is to grow that dog slow. And that's what those large breed growth formulas or large breed puppy formulas are designed for. So they address a couple of things. One is that they're lower in calories so that we're not over nutritioning those dogs. They have high quality proteins because we want to grow that dog. You know, we want the building blocks to be good. So you want to have high quality proteins, but probably more importantly is that they're lower in calcium and vitamin D. And that's the part that people miss. And that's what your maintenance formula is not going to be restricted in, calcium and vitamin D. And it's the calcium and laying those bones down, and particularly the joints, that's important for that slowed growth. And so, you know, finding those large breed puppy specific formulas, that's part of the equation, probably the most important part of the equation. And that's not addressed in those maintenance formulas. Those maintenance formulas are going to have too much calcium, and that's where we're still going to have those orthopedic issues. And so I think with large breed dogs, with growing athletic dogs, probably the best thing that we've had developed in the course of our lifetime are these large breed specific formulas. And that's the stuff that can't be undone, right? So, you know, you have these great big dogs, feeding them that out 18, 24 months, and they're going to get to that mature body weight, right? So a lot of people think, well, I don't want to, you know, I'm breeding these big muscular dogs or this big athletic dog, I don't want it to be small. And that's another fallacy that people have. It's not going to shrink them. It's just going to take them longer to get to that endpoint, where the opposite can be true. And so, you know, you get these 120-pound Labradors that should be 75 pounds, and they still look muscular and athletic. You can put too much fuel on that fire, and the dog might not get fat while it's growing. But if you know, we were supposed to get to 75 pounds and we get to 120 pounds, suddenly our body isn't what it was genetically designed for, right? And that's where we're going to have some of those orthopedic issues, hip issues, knee issues. And it's just a dog that was bigger than it should have been. And so you can create too big a dog based on genetics. you're not gonna, unless you did something awful with your nutrition, you're not gonna make a dog too small. You're just gonna take it longer to get to that mature body weight.
Gotcha. And I saw you talking on raw dog food. Would you explain the dangers of raw dog food?
Sure. So the big thing with a couple of things. So it used to be something I was pretty passionate about in the clinic, advocating against. And I think the problem is that it's a couple of fold. So one is that most people don't have a diet that was actually developed by a nutritionist. They found some internet or, some dog breeder friend or, somebody at a trial, said, hey, this is what I'm feeding. And what happens typically is that the dog is selectively eating part of that diet, right? So it's not getting a balanced diet. Even if it was formulated, they're usually selecting out the tasty bits and leaving some of the other stuff. And so a lot of these dogs are not getting a balanced nutrition product. And so if I have clients that want to feed raw, what I ask them to do is if we can consult with a nutritionist to make sure that they're feeding a balanced diet, particularly with the micronutrients, right? So we start talking about the vitamins, the minerals, and things like that, because over time, those things can be very, very important. And so that's point one is I think most people are not feeding a balanced diet when they go the home cooked or raw route. The other big factor is with raw diets is bacterial contamination, both for the dog itself, but for the humans involved in the environment. And so going back to your question on antibiotics, one of the places that we've actually seen antibiotic resistant bacteria is in the feces of dogs fed a raw diet. And so it's not coming from them, but from the cattle and different things like that. So it is something that it's an area that we're ever increasing our knowledge. And most of the things that we know about feeding raw is that they come with these other risks, not necessarily all health related to the dogs, but global risks for us as well. In that there are no studies to show that there's any benefit to that. And so I think that the other part of it is everybody assumes that if I feed my dog that way, there's going to be increased health benefits. And again, I think if we go back to what the major manufacturers are doing, they're wanting to produce a formula that these dogs are going to live for a long period of time. And I think we see that, like the age of these dogs has increased. I should tell you for myself, I'm a pretty clean eater. And there was a period in my time when I was doing marathons and triathlons that like I was basically a locavore. I was, farmers market vegetables, proteins that I acquired. Like I believe in that clean mindset and healthy eating sort of behaviors. And so if I felt like there was a solution for my dogs that was the best, I'd be the first one out there trumpeting it, because I want my dogs to live forever. And so it would be a selfish endeavor, like that what the evidence shows is what I'm going to do. And I think right now the evidence shows that feeding these well-balanced formulas is going to be what's in the best interest of our dogs. That may change, just like our discussion on spay and neuter, right? Like things change over time. I just think as humans, we're really reluctant to embrace change and accept new information. And that may happen in the food world. Right now, I think the major manufacturers have the best evidence that they're doing what's best for these dogs.
Gotcha. Okay. Hey guys, if you need raw dog food anywhere in the United States, be sure to visit our friends over at TexasTripe.com.